Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Tracy Alexander and it's a pleasure to be with you. Coming up in today's newscast, permission denied. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will have to face court on Sunday in a historic first for a sitting Israeli premier. Israelis are set to get their own special island in the Seychelles over summer as tourism looks to reopen, and Jerusalem Day celebrations kick off in the Holy Land. Well, even if you're the Prime Minister of Israel, you're not entitled to a free pass when it comes to the court of law. Benjamin Netanyahu will have to appear in person for the opening session of his upcoming corruption trial after his requests to skip it were denied. Aaron Porras kicks off our coverage.
For the first time in Israel's history, a sitting prime minister set to stand trial under charges of criminal corruption. And after Premier Benjamin Netanyahu's petition to skip the first hearing this Sunday was shot down by the court, tensions are high. Security for the presiding judges is being ramped up ahead of the May 24th appearance. Netanyahu's team arguing that with increased security in a small courtroom, the proceedings would violate social distancing measures. But the prosecution did not find that to be a good enough reason for the premier not to attend. So, what are the charges that he's facing? First is Case 1000. Netanyahu is charged with fraud and breach of trust because he and his wife Sarah are alleged to have received almost 700,000 shekels, or over $200,000 worth of gifts from Israeli Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan and Australian billionaire James Packer. This in return for help in private business dealings. Neither Packer nor Milchan face any charges. Next is Case 2000. Again, Netanyahu is charged with fraud and breach of trust for allegedly negotiating a deal with Arnon Moses, owner of Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot. In this deal, Netanyahu would allegedly receive better coverage in exchange for passing legislation that would damage the growth of rival newspaper Israel Hayom. The legislation did not pass, though, and Moses is under indictment for offering a bribe. Finally, Case 4000, aka the Bezik affair. This is arguably the most serious case, in which Netanyahu is alleged to have passed regulatory favors for Israeli telecommunications company Bezik. Favors totaling about $500 million, or 1.8 billion shekels. And in return, Netanyahu would again receive positive news coverage, but this time from Walla News, which Bezik controls. Former Bezik board member and controlling chair of Walla, Shaul Elovich, and his wife Iris have also been charged with bribery and obstruction of justice. Now, the 7 charges together, carrying a sentence totaling of up to 22 years in prison and/or a fine. All the defendants named in these cases, including leading Prime Minister Netanyahu, are denying any wrongdoing. Netanyahu maintaining that he's a victim of political and media witch hunts.
Now, as for what's expected in this Sunday's historic hearing, we're joined by columnist Mark Schulman here in studio. Mark, a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure.
All right, so talk us through what we can expect. What will this Sunday's hearing entail?
Well, Sunday is actually the reading of all of the charges against him. So it'll be a long reading. I don't know how long it'll take, but it'll probably take 2 or 3 hours to read all of the charges and all the details against him and against others. That is an opportunity usually for a defendant to, first of all, say that I understand the charges against me and to ask any sort of clarifying information. In every case until now, that's a requirement. The defendant has to be there to hear the charges that are brought against him, and it'll take a few hours for it to take part. And
right.
The visual of that is going to be interesting.
Certainly the visuals will be, but we know that, of course, this is the first trial, so the prosecution says he has to be there. We know over the hearing, we know over the course of the trial he won't be expected to be in every single hearing, although there will be a lot of stress, no doubt, on the Israeli premier. How could this impact his ability to lead?
Well, I would think he'd have to be in most of the cases. Most of the time he'll have to be here. I don't think it's possible for him really not to be there. If a witness is on, he's the one who can say to his lawyers, you know what, he's not telling you the truth, or why don't you ask him about this? I don't think it's very, very rare for a defendant not to be there. I'm not even sure he's allowed not to be there. How will it affect? Well, he claims he's a Superman, and therefore he can do both things simultaneously. He also claimed to Prime Minister Olmert before he resigned and before he was even charged with anything that you can't be involved in being Prime Minister at the same time that you're worried about your trial. And here we're at the stage where not only is he worried about his trial, the trial is taking place, and he thinks he can do both.
Well, he certainly might want to be there, considering all the commentary we've been hearing even today about whether the Premier will even be able to get a fair trial.
Right, so this has been a plan since the very beginning. At the first stages, when the investigation began, there were attacks by members of the Likud against the police. The police were biased, the police were this, even though the police commissioner at the time had been appointed by Netanyahu, and it was someone clearly from the right wing of, lived in the settlements, a right-wing guy, religious guy, but he was against Netanyahu. Then when it went to the prosecutor's office, it moved to attacking the prosecutors. Then when it moved to Mandelblit, who was the attorney general, I'm not sure that Netanyahu expected him to actually go ahead and charge him, because what's come out recently about Mandelblit was something that quite clearly Netanyahu knew all about, what's called the Hapaz affair, the issue with the appointment of the last two times the chief of staff, and he knew about all these things that had come out, but he appointed him anyway. My guess was because he thought he had that over him. But now that Mandelblit has gone forward, they're trying to undermine Mandelblit, who, again, a religious guy, worked closely with Netanyahu for many years, and he's being said, well, he's a left wing, he's working for the left wing, he's working for the press. Now, the next stage, of course, is the judges. And today we saw Prime Minister Netanyahu quote an article by a jurist in Israel who said that Netanyahu can't get a fair trial. So the Prime Minister of Israel is tweeting a quote from someone who's saying that he can't get a fair trial in Israel. And so the next stage is to undermine the judiciary and say, I can't get a fair trial. And the whole goal is to make the judiciary, the police, the state prosecutor, everybody to be against him. It's therefore some sort of a conspiracy. They've been working at this for years at this point. And they come back and say, look who's not liked in the country, who's not believed. Well, guess why they're not believed? Because we've been undermining them for the last couple of years.
Right, well, there's certainly been many new precedents set here. We're about to see one of the most historic, I suppose you could say, on Sunday. Mark Schulman, thank you for that insight.
My pleasure.
All right, well, we've seen the tit-for-tat between Iran and Israel, backed by the United States, ramp up this past 2 weeks with crippling cyber attacks between the Islamic regime and the Jewish state. But the cyber warfare isn't only limited to critical infrastructure. It's also playing out in cyberspace over social media. Nittany Manson has the story.
Israel, the United States, and Iran are at it again in a war of words over a controversial graphic posted on Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's website, showing people celebrating at the Temple Mount compound in Jerusalem after apparently capturing it from Israel. You can see the Palestinian flag there raised over the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The graphic reads, "The final solution, resistance until freedom." The post sparking outrage, America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, hitting back, calling the Supreme Leader's comments disgusting, hateful, and not representative of the Iranian people. Pompeo pointing out 2 earlier tweets by the Iranian Supreme Leader calling Israel a cancerous tumor and calling for arming the Palestinians in the West Bank. But he didn't stop there, Pompeo slamming Khamenei for using the Nazi call for the final solution, and seemingly referring to the UN arms embargo on Iran, which is set to expire in October, Pompeo adding, "Is this someone who can be trusted with deadly weapons?" The Israeli Prime Minister's office also swift to reply, pointing out the words "the final solution," saying it brings to mind the Nazis' plan to annihilate the Jewish people, warning Iran that its threats to destroy Israel would put it in similar danger. The poster on Khamenei's website appears to have since been deleted.
Well, now to some news I'm sure you've all been waiting for. Americans will once again be able to travel to Israel via Delta Airlines from next month. But those arriving before June 15 will unfortunately still need to self-isolate for 14 days. Not so, though, for Israelis who will now be given the chance to vacation on nearby islands, some with a piece of paradise all to themselves. Take a look. The hot weather seems to be helping. The long-awaited answer as to when Israelis can travel to beaches further afield for the summer months. The Seychelles, an archipelago off the east coast of Africa, is setting aside an island exclusively for Israelis. But exclusive really is the word, because a destination like this, well, it doesn't come cheap. The idea is that Israelis will be able to indulge along the pristine coastline, which touches the Indian Ocean, without having to risk mingling with people from other countries. Just over a 2 hours flight away from Israel, Greece also announcing it will kick off its tourist season. On June 15, seasonal hotels in mainland Greece will begin to open to foreign guests. And on July 1, international flights will gradually begin heading directly for holiday destinations.
Στους επισκέπτες μας θα γίνονται δειγματοληπτικά τεστ και θα τηρούνται τα γενικά υγειονομικά μας πρωτόκολλα, που δεν θα σκιάσουν ωστόσο ούτε το λαμπερό μας ήλιο, ούτε τη φυσική ομορφιά της Ελλάδος.
Israel is expected to be among the list of countries in the first wave of international visitors allowed into Greece, which should be announced before the end of May. And hotels are already gearing up.
Και στο πρωινό, ώστε να αποφεύγεται η οποιαδήποτε επαφή, τα πρωινά τα σερβίρουμε στα δωμάτια, έχουμε καταργήσει το χώρο του πρωινού, αλλά και τα τραπέζια, εάν θέλει κάποιος πελάτης να κάτσει στον ελεύθερο του χρόνο, τα έχουμε απομακρυσμένα ώστε να μην έρχονται σε επαφή και να μην υπάρχει συγχρονισμός.
Cyprus will reopen its airports on June 9. And as for flying into Israel, well, officials are weighing up removing self-isolation requirements for travellers from 5 countries: Greece, Cyprus, the Seychelles, Georgia and Montenegro. Talks are also underway about adding Austria to the list. And Americans rejoice. Delta Airlines announcing on its website it will resume flights between New York and Israel at the start of next month. Well, and it looks like almost perfect timing because in terms of coming back to Israel, well, travellers will have to self-isolate for 14 days, so there'll be less of a decision to weigh up. And now to help us understand how this incredible deal has been struck between Israel and the Seychelles, I'm joined in studio by Dov Kalman from Seychelles Airlines in Israel. Dov, a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So talk us through how Israelis got so lucky to have their own Seychelles island to themselves.
Well, it was a brave decision and a unique decision actually made by the Seychelles Ministry of Health. They decided from all the destinations that Air Seychelles is flying to, they decided, well, Israel is seemingly a very safe place and we are welcoming the Israeli audience. And they created a model that is, I think, unique in the world. Mm-hmm. They created not just a free corona side, they created a place that is for the Israelis and for the Seychelles. I mean, meaning that there is no fear for whatsoever what's the case, because there was no corona in Seychelles, basically.
Oh, right, okay.
11 cases and the last weeks, no new case whatsoever, no death whatsoever. Mm-hmm, so it's a wonderful place. It was a wonderful place, but it's now even better than ever before.
And it's almost a brand new destination in many ways for Israelis because they only started travelling to Israel, Seychelles Airlines, last November.
Right.
So how many Israelis typically visit the Seychelles?
Well, last year we had 4,000. This year we expected 20,000 actually because of this new flight of Air Seychelles, starting in the beginning 1 flight a week, 2 flights a week, up to 3 flights a week. It became tremendously popular because it is, of course, the ultimate tropical destination you can dream of. And especially now in the post-corona period where you have your own villa, your own space and your own beauty and for a wonderful price. Actually, it's half the price more or less than what it was before, taking everything into consideration.
We're talking half the price, but Seychelles, we're looking at these beautiful pictures and it is a bit of an exclusive destination, let's be honest. When we're talking half the price, I mean, is it affordable to just anybody or is this pretty,
Well, I don't want to get into the shoes of what is affordable for everybody. It's not Cyprus. It is Seychelles, and Seychelles has, of course, a different kind of atmosphere, and it's more pricey. But the price that is being offered for the first flight on June, by the end of June, we actually start with a weekly flight, and it becomes a 2 weekly flights. The first price starts from $1,690 US, meaning for a flight. 1 week at this resort, half board in a villa. I mean, there have never been prices like these.
Certainly. But then we have to also talk about safety. What if somebody does get sick on the island? What kind of measures are being put in place to ensure people are safe?
First of all, it's the test before the flight. I mean, at Ben Gurion Airport, that is the main flight. Then when you arrive, you'll be checked again. Then on the island itself, if God forbid something happens, then of course there is the medical services all around. It is a very well-served destination, and the fact that there has been 0 death, there have been so few cases, is actually proven itself.
Certainly, and very good news, of course, that we're not seeing any more people sadly lose their lives. Dov, thank you so much for that insight.
Thank you.
And
I'm
certainly really hoping that I can cash in on that deal and find my way over to Seychelles. But I've just started here at ILTV, so I'll have to wait.
24th of June. I'll take care of that. I'll take care of you. Yeah.
All right.
You have a deal.
I'll hold you to that. Thanks,
See you
John.
on the flight. Okay.
Well, it seems I got pretty lucky with that one. And as Israelis get set to jet off overseas, some of them could even, if they wanted to, work from those holiday destinations, and their bosses, well, might not even care. Because as coronavirus restrictions ease, tech giants aren't telling their employees to rush back to work. In the United States, at least, companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Amazon are telling their employees they can continue to work from home. Some saying they don't have to come back until 2021. Twitter, for its part, telling employees they can work at home forever. Now, Israel, the startup nation, is well known for its high-tech industry. So for more on how Israel is coordinating its back-to-work agenda, I'm joined by consumer behaviour expert Vili Abraham. Vili, great to have you with us. Now, moves like this come from the United States headquarters. So will we expect to see Israeli branches follow suit?
Well, surprisingly, if you look at workers in the United States and workers in Israel, they have very different opinions about working from home. So in the United States, around 50% to 2/3 of employees prefer to stay home because they're afraid of being infected in the workplace. However, if you look at what is happening in Israel, workers prefer going back to work and working from their offices.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps in the United States, this trend might be about work-life balance, or is there a whole lot more to it? Is there some benefit to the employers?
Well, if you look at employers, there are a lot of benefits. So first of all, they save a lot of money because they don't have to pay for transportation to get you to work. They can also relocate to smaller places and pay less rent, especially in very expensive places like New York and California. So there are certainly a lot of benefits. Of course, there are also a lot of benefits to the economy. If you look at Israel, for example, it costs millions of shekels every year to the economy because of congestion and traffic accidents.
Then what else then has coronavirus taught businesses about what's possible, I suppose, after this forced trial, you could call it?
Yeah, well, it taught businesses many things. So first of all, it taught them that they can do much more than they expected from having people work at home, because you can actually do everything. If you look at, for example, at Intel, which has purchased MoveIt, the deal was sealed via Zoom. So a lot of things can be done via, virtual communication platforms. And workers have been very productive from working home. The only thing now during the coronavirus is that people had difficulties working from home because kids were there. But if you neutralize that aspect, then you can become much more productive because you're sitting in a place where, you're convenient in your room.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, adaptability has become one of the words for 2020, I suppose we could say. Vili Abraham, thank you for that insight.
It was a pleasure.
Well, we move now from the high-tech high-rises to the cobbled stones of the old city. Jerusalem Day celebrations begin tonight. 53 years passed since Israel's recapturing of the Holy City in 1967, uniting it under Israel's flag for the first time in modern history. Well, I'm joined in studio by ILTV anchor Aaron Porras, who has more details on this historic day. Aaron, great to have you with us.
It's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, tell us a little bit more about why Jerusalem Day is so important to Israelis.
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of reasons. There's the religious and cultural aspects, and then, of course, the nationalistic aspects to that. So I'll start with the nationalistic reasons. As you said, this is the anniversary of uniting Jerusalem after the 1967 war, after it was divided between Israel and Jordan in 1948. And actually in 1992, Israel officially declared its commitment to keeping Jerusalem united. As far as religious issues are concerned, of course, Jerusalem is the center to the Abrahamic faiths. It's mentioned thousands of times in Jewish religious texts. And then with regaining access to the Western Wall, the chief rabbinate in Israel actually declared it a minor Jewish holiday, complete with its own prayers. Wow. All that said, most secular Israelis living outside of the city are not terribly concerned with Jerusalem Day anymore. And then of course you have people who are outright against the day, including certain minor Hasidic texts, the Palestinian Authority, certain Arab Israelis, etc.
And as you say, it's a huge day in Israel. It's normally celebrated with a lot of pomp and circumstance. A little bit different though this year. How have things been in years gone by?
So in the past, it was very jovial and celebratory kind of scene. There were parades, there were concerts, there's all sorts of street parties, singing, dancing, lectures, and special tours. Currently, it's a little bit different, as you said, with the coronavirus in full swing. We're changing things. We actually spoke to the Jerusalem mayor, though, Moshe Leon, to find out what exactly is in store. Let's take a look.
השנה אנחנו מקפידים כמעט על כל האירועים המסורתיים של יום ירושלים כן לקיים, אבל ללא קהל. כלומר, יש את האירוע בגבעת התחמושת, יש את האזכרות שיש באותו יום של חללי ששת הימים, אירועים שונים שאנחנו מקפידים עליהם כל שנה, אנחנו גם השנה עושים אותם, תפילה בכותל, אבל במסגרת הכללים זה יהיה ללא קהל או קהל מצומצם של עד 50 איש.
So as you said, Aaron, of course, the city's normally packed with tourists, and the Jerusalem mayor, in fact, told you that he can't wait for the skies to open. But he also had a really sweet message for our viewers. Take a listen.
קודם כל, אני חייב לומר לכם שכראש עיריית ירושלים אני מתגעגע אליכם. אני מאחל לכם ולכולנו שבאמת לא נדע עוד יותר בעיות כאלה, לא נדע עוד מגפות כאלה, ושרק נשמור על הבריאות, נהיה בריאים עם ירושלים חזקה ואיתכם כאן בירושלים. בואו אלינו.
All right, yeah, so an amazing wish for everybody, and again, for all those who cannot physically participate with crowds, or maybe they're just not in Israel, everything is going to be available on Zoom. It's going to be really great.
And just as we heard from Billy, of course, this seems to be the way of the future, so amazing that everyone can get involved. Aaron, thank you so much for that insight. All right, well, Israeli parents have finally been relieved of their homeschooling duties now that classes have mostly resumed around the country. But for children in Gaza, it's a different story. The coronavirus lockdown there has sparked a wonderful initiative by a Gazan teen, as Nittany Manson reports.
If you're thinking this teacher looks a little too young to lead class, you'd be right. But 13-year-old Gaza teen Fajr Hamaid said she just didn't have much of a choice.
طبعا سبب إغلاق المدارس بسبب وباء فيروس كورونا طبعا هذا أدى لإغلاق المدارس كمان هم رح يقعدوا زهقانين في بيتهم وأنا طبعا حبيت إني أجيبهم عندي عشان أدرسهم طبعا هاي موهبتي طبعا هلقيت مثلا عندي بنت بصف أول لو تركت المدرسة فترة حتنسى كيف تمسك القلم حتنسى أصلا كيف كمان تكتب فأنا حبيت إني أنميها وحبيت إنه ما يفقدوا المعلومات اللي كانوا ياخدوها في المدرسة.
Well, with a classroom quickly growing from 4 to 15 students in just a few weeks, it seems the local students are as happy to learn from her as she is to teach. And Hamaid offers classes in English, Arabic, and mathematics along with other subjects, all while keeping up with her own studies.
أنا كمان لما بتابع برضه على النت على صفحة صوت التربية والتعليم بينزلوا فيديوهات للتعليم وبتابعهم برضه.
With roughly 20 confirmed cases of coronavirus in the Gaza Strip, the coastal territory's 700 schools have all been closed or moved online since March. But Hamaid, who dreams of being a professional teacher in the future, is happy to fill in the gaps.
أنا حابة أطلع بالمستقبل معلمة كمان هاي موهبتي إني أدرس الأطفال بما إنه منطقتنا منطقة مهمشة فأنا حابة إنه يكون عندي مركز ودايما أنا بحب لأهل مجتمعي بحب طبعا يكون مجتمعي ناجح.
Unbelievable. Well, let's take a look now at the weather forecast. It really doesn't feel like it, but the heat wave seems to be waning. In Tel Aviv, a low tonight of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 21 degrees Celsius. And tomorrow we're headed for a high of 85 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 29 degrees Celsius. Those in Eilat, though, are still headed for a scorcher with a top of 102 degrees Fahrenheit tomorrow, that's 39 degrees Celsius. And now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. All right, so that would be in Israel much needed water that it seems this guy is very intelligently using as a shower. And I suppose that everybody here in Israel is watching this very enviously, considering the temperatures we've been seeing the past few days. All right, well, that is it for today's news. And today's exchange rate is 3.51 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. And if there's a story you'd like to share with us or more you'd like to know on an issue, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Tracy Alexander. Thank you for watching.